Welcome to class, guys. We're going to get started pretty on point today, only 1 minute after the start time. So we're going to be covering a couple things, but I want to show you guys what the Google Classroom classwork feed looks like right now. So that way it should be like this for every period, but I'll go back and double check to make sure everything's in the proper order. So I'm going to start off. We are going to eventually get to this in just a second. I want to review that with you guys, but so here's the class, or the class stream. This is for second period, but I want you guys to notice a couple things. So up at the top here, we do have math videos now. So anytime somebody asks for help with a math problem, I'm going to record myself solving it, and then I will post the videos underneath math videos. So far I've done math videos 1 and 2. Math video 1 is from packet 2. It's pages 161 through 163. And then math video 2 is packet 1, days 2 and 5. And there's a couple problems from each of those days, not the full day. I've gotten rid of the promotion survey because it looks like we're going to have to do a virtual promotion. Mr. Shelby is going to give you guys some more information on that. That was just beyond our control, and I'm sorry because I really wanted to be able to see you guys in person one more time, but this is what it's looking like. So stay safe and stay healthy so that way I have the ability to see you again in the future, okay? I definitely want to be able to see you guys again. So got a chat here from Celeste. Thank you, Celeste, for the thumbs up. We have our Zoom sessions. This is where I put all the recordings for the Zoom session, including today's will go up here as well. And then as I haven't redone the order because technically May 6th should be down here at the bottom so it goes in the proper order, but that happens. Quick writes, I finally fixed all of those for every period. And now we're into the sectionalism. So if you guys have been paying attention to this section, as you guys have been, I don't know, working through the stuff in Google Classroom, I just realized that there were a couple of assignments that I wasn't going to get to like thoroughly explain. And so I just went ahead and took them off. So now you have less assignments in here. But again, I want you guys to remember that technically all these things are optional. Do I want you to do them? Heck yeah. I don't like make stuff just for the fun of it. I do this, I put stuff in here intentionally so that way when you get over to the high school, you guys are ready for whatever. Okay, so I think it is very important that you guys try to do as much as you can. But again, don't stress yourself out. That is not the goal here, okay? So we are going to talk about 2 assignments today. We're going to talk about Sumner painting, which I hope that you guys got a chance to watch the video for. If not, that's fine. We're going to go over the answers for things. But if you haven't yet, please watch that video. It's a good one. And then we're also going to talk about John Brown. Was he a hero or was he a criminal? So I'm going to pull up, this is the Sumner painting assignment, and this is the already filled in portion, just because some of you guys might have not seen the video yet, and so I still wanted to be able to go through this and kind of just address some things, okay? So what's nice is that this is being recorded, so if you don't get the answers right now, you could always go back and copy them down. So hint, hint, answers are being given, so take advantage, okay? So the main people that are involved are Charles Sumner and Preston Brooks. Charles Sumner worked for the Senate and he's from Massachusetts. Preston Brooks worked for the House of Representatives and was from South Carolina. Sumner was against slavery, Brooks was pro-slavery, and his second cousin was Andrew Butler, who Sumner made fun of in a speech. So it's saying my connection's unstable again, so I might be freezing, but just remember that the recording will be just okay. So background info. To which state has the debate over slavery shifted by the mid-1850s? Kansas. That's where we eventually get the nickname Bleeding Kansas. That's right over here. what battle was taking place at this time, Kansas becoming a state, and whether it was going to be free or slave. What violent acts were being committed, murder, assault, property damage, all sorts of stuff, okay? And then the big thing that Sumner delivers is a speech, and this is the catalyst to him getting beaten almost to death. So in his speech, Charles Sumner insults South Carolina Senator Andrew Butler, who is Preston Brooks's cousin. He basically says that Butler has a mistress who is ugly and polluted by most of the world, but lovely in his eyes, and he's referring to slavery. Slavery is ugly to everyone else, but to him, he seems to think it's fine. Some warned Sumner not to give the speech. That's very true. A lot of people try to talk him out of it. And then after hearing Sumner's speech, Preston Brooks went into the Senate chamber carrying his cane. So this is kind of just a summary of the events. Brooks walks up to Sumner and explains how he has read his speech and how insulting it is, then proceeds to hit him numerous times with his cane until his cane splinters into several pieces. Few people come to the aid of Sumner. So you gotta imagine the scene here. Sumner's just working at his desk. This guy comes over and says like, hey, your speech was not okay, and just beating him. And this is what's really important to know is that that Preston Brooks beat Sumner to the point of unconsciousness. Like if he had continued, if his cane hadn't splintered, he probably would have died. So it's crazy because really these two men don't experience any sort of, well, Preston Brooks doesn't get punished at all. He ends up getting awards and parades in his honor for standing up to the anti-slavery people. Sumner has brain damage, he's unconscious, spinal injuries, he's out of work for 3 years, but then he eventually comes back. All of these people still have jobs, well, not now because obviously they're dead, but they had jobs after all of this. Like they still continue to work. So what is the most immediate impact of the caning? It looked so bad that many moderates flocked to the Republican or anti-slavery party, and the party grows rapidly, okay? So if you watch somebody else beat somebody up and no one does anything, normally you're going to go to the side of the person who was beat up most of the time. So the Republican Party just grew. It like exploded. And then Sumner caning highlights what is known as the irreconcilable period. Why do you think this is? It makes sure, make sure kids know, oh yeah, you need to know what the word irreconcilable means. Irreconcilable means it cannot be fixed. So if you think about this, this one's kind of more of a put in your own response. But are you able to easily forgive somebody who almost killed you? Like think about that for a second. So like Sumner gets beaten to the point of death or almost to the point of death. Like, are you going to be best friends with that person again is kind of a thought that I have. Heck no, Celeste says, yeah, I would not be best friends with that person anymore. I wouldn't even want to work with that person anymore. So you got to think about how politics was at this time. So if a Southerner is beating up Northerners, are the North and South going to be friends anymore? Probably not. So yeah, no one's going to want to go back to that. No one's going to want to try to save that friendship. It's still going on to some extent, and it's not so much a North versus South, it's just a very much a racial divide. So it's not necessarily, because I see what your point is there, Maya, it's still going on for sure. People are still doing these kinds of things, but it's not so much like North versus South, it's kind of just a racial divide. So it's definitely still a thing today, but we don't have as much, just because people move so frequently. So like people in the North can become Southerners, Southerners become Northerners. So it's not so much a regional or where you live type thing. It's more of like what kind of prejudices do you harbor type thing. So, but very good point there. Let us move on then. So the next thing I want to talk about is John Brown. So there's a lot of thoughts as to like John Brown and whether he was a good person or not. I've changed this assignment because I think I was asking for a little bit too much with it. Because originally I was going to have you do the source slides and then also the John Brown 5-step, but that's really, it's a lot for you guys right now, and I don't want to add on to any stress. So I'm going to show you guys kind of what I'm looking for here. I want to talk about John Brown though, because he is such a controversial figure in history. If you go some places in the South, like he's still considered a bad person. He's considered to be a radical who tried to allow for freedom of slaves. And he did quite a few things that are very questionable when he was alive. So we're going to I just want to look at sources 1 and 2 for right now. And then you guys, sources 1 and 2 from Station 1. You don't have to do all of these. Like, I would definitely encourage you though to read through these because they're super fascinating. I absolutely find John Brown to be one of the most interesting people that I've ever studied. He's interesting and he's complex, and that's humanity in general though, right? We're all complex, we're all very different. And so like there's a little bit of villain and hero in all of us. And to different people, we're different things. So for slaves and anti-slavery people, John Brown was a hero. And then for people who were like pro-slavery, he was seen more like a criminal. But there's definitely people on both sides that were like, he was crazy. He definitely thought it was okay to kill people as long as it got to eventually having freedom. So that's something I always like kind of wrestle with, is like, what do I think about this person? Because he killed quite a few people. It's not like he was like innocent at all, but he killed people for what he could justify as the right reasons. So it's very interesting, and I'm definitely interested in hearing what you guys have to. So let's go ahead and take a look. I want to also show you guys the source guide. So I do want you guys to please be very careful when you're working in here, because I've already had a couple people mention that pages are disappearing. On my end, they're fine, but the thing is that people might be accidentally deleting their pages. If you delete a page, that's fine. That's totally fine. You don't have to make up that page, just do what you can, okay? So let me show you guys. This is the work. Let me zoom in a little bit here. So we're just going to focus on Station 1. We're not going to do any more than that today. I just want to kind of try to keep this as short and sweet as possible, because I know our videos sometimes go a little bit longer. So here's the directions. Complete each of the following sections using the information provided at each station. Once you complete this packet, you will begin your assessment, which will have you take a stance on John Brown. Was he a hero or was he a criminal? Now, you have access to the final bit, so if you want to go and like fill in the 5-step explaining why you think John Brown is a hero, a criminal, or maybe a mix of both, you can totally do that. I'm not saying you can't. I just like, the main thing I want you to focus on for right now is just, let's just do these stations so you can get a feel for who John Brown was, okay? So let's just take a look and kind of preview some of these questions before we get into the sources. We'll take some turns reading if I can get some volunteers in a second. So the questions for Station 1, before we get started, it's why did John Brown and his sons move to Kansas? So really quickly, we can actually look at that together. So it says up here in like kind of the introduction piece, In 1855, John Brown and his 5 sons moved to Kansas just after the territory had been opened for the possible expansion of slavery by the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Joining the struggle there between pro-slavery and free soil settlers, Brown settled into the anti-slavery town of Lawrence and appointed himself captain of the anti-slavery forces on the, I'm going to butcher this, so if somebody actually knows how to say it, that's fine. But for me, it's just Osawatomie Creek. I'm not sure if that's correct at all. I'm terrible at pronunciation. Brown and his sons came prepared to defend the territory against slavery, as reported by the Herald, a Free Soil Kansas newspaper. So essentially the first question is just, why did they move to Kansas? They are there to try to make the state, because remember, Kansas was going to use popular sovereignty, people's votes, to decide whether they would be free or slave state. So they were trying to make Kansas a free state. Can you guys see what I'm typing on this screen right now? That's showing up for everyone? It might be frozen, I'm not sure. If you want to, you can also just, yes, you can see it, okay, cool. Also remember, you guys have the ability to unmute yourselves. I'm trusting that you guys can handle that today. So if you want to, just to respond quicker to me, because it does take me a second to get the chat to work, you could always just turn off your mic or turn on your microphone and then say yes or whatnot, okay? So let's go ahead and let's read through source 1. Would anybody be willing to read source 1 for us?
Me.
Who's me?
Celeste.
Okay, go for it, Celeste.
Okay.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
In 1855.
I've already read that part. You
Okay.
can just read where it, about noon.
Okay. About noon, December 7th, Mr. John Brown and an aged gentleman from Essex. Oh, what?
Essex County, New York.
Essex County, NY, who has been a resident of the territory for several months, arrived with 4 of his sons, leaving several others at home, hands by Eastern friends for the defense of the cause of freedom. Having more than he could use to advantage, a portion of them were placed in his hands. Of those more destitute,
Perfect. Mm-hmm.
yeah, a company was organized, and the command given by to Mr. Brown for the zeal he had exhibited in the cause of freedom, both before and since his arrival in the territory.
Perfect. So I do want to touch base on what's happening here. So this is reported in a newspaper. It's a Free Soil newspaper. So they're anti-slavery. Basically, he comes down to the territory of Kansas from New York, which is anti-slavery for the most part. And he brings 4 of his sons. I believe he had like 15 or 16 kids, and 2 wives, like not at the same time. He had like a wife that died and then remarried kind of thing. I believe that's how it worked. I did a speech on him when I was in high school because I just thought he was absolutely interesting. But he brought a quantity of arms. When you hear arms, guys, that doesn't mean that he brought like a bunch of like amputated arms with him. He brought guns, and he had so many of them that he was just like handing them out to people who didn't have guns. Okay, so that's kind of what this is talking about. So let's go ahead and like fill in some of the answers. Other than his son, who else or what else is Brown bringing with him? I just kind of said it, so unmute yourselves and tell me what he brought with him.
Guns.
Guns, yeah. So He brought arms. I'm going to put that arms, which means. How is John Brown being received by those in Kansas, and why do you think that is? So think about this for a second. He decided to move to a free soil town, which means that they were anti-slavery. And then he's handing out guns to people. Like, so do you think people are going to think he's cool?
No.
Actually, they do, because back then, like, they loved people who gave them guns, okay? So how is John Brown being received by those in Kansas? Free soil folks loved him because he gave them guns. Now, pro-slavery folks would probably be kind of scared because you have this guy who brings his sons and then just a ton of guns with him to hand them out to people to fight against the pro-slavery people. So very interesting situation. But yeah, the free soil folks are very much into him. They're like, this guy's cool. He just gave me a free gun. I'm down with that, okay? So let's go ahead and look at source 2. So source 2 is another short little paragraph. The little heading above it says, shortly after arriving, John Brown described the atmosphere in Kansas when he wrote home to his family on December 16th. So can I get somebody to read his little letter that he sent home? You can just unmute yourself and let me know. Who is that?
Lizzie.
Oh, go for it, Lizzie.
About 3 or 4 weeks ago, news came that a Free State man by the name of Doe had been murdered by a pro-slavery man named Coleman, who had gone and given himself up for a trial to pro-slavery. Governor Shannon. This was soon followed by further news that a free slave man, who was the only reliable witness against the murder, had been seized by a Missourian appointed sheriff by the bogus legislature of Kansas upon false pretenses. The Free State man was then rescued by a band of free soilers, to which Governor Shannon ordered out all the pro-slavery forces he could muster in the territory and call on Missouri for further help to seize all free soilers and their arms. This is the state of things in Kansas, and an attack is constantly looked for. Tension continued on the night we left. Company of invaders from the 15th and 25 attacked some 3 or 4 Free State men, mostly unarmed, killing a Mr. Barber from Ohio, who wholly unarmed.
Wholly unarmed.
Wholly unarmed. Your affectionate husband and father, John Brown.
So I want to kind of unpack this letter because there's a lot happening in it, and this kind of shows how John Brown becomes very radicalized. So what he starts off talking about here is he talks about how there's a free state, so somebody who's against slavery. He's been murdered by someone who's pro-slavery. So Doe, however you want to pronounce it, he was murdered because he was anti-slavery. And he was murdered by a guy who was pro-slavery. And what's crazy here is that John Brown sees a very broken judicial system, because what happens is the case goes to trial in front of somebody who is pro-slavery. And we always hope that judges can kind of, put aside their feelings when they're doing these cases, but there's only one witness in this case, and he happens to be anti-slavery. And so pretty much he's taken by somebody who's from Missouri, who's pro-slavery. And so basically it's this back and forth between somebody is getting murdered for their views, and somebody is not going to face justice because the rest of the people who are in the judicial system in this area are all pro-slavery. So they kind of just scoop this murder kind of like under the rug. And all of these tensions start to build to the point where there's a group of free men or free state men who get jumped and ambushed by a group of, I think it's 25. Let's see here. 15 to 25 attacked some 3 or 4 free state men, okay? So a group of 15 to 25 pro-slavery people attacked a group of 3 or 4 anti-slavery, okay? So all of these tensions are just building. That's kind of what's going on in this letter. So I'm just going to go back to making sure that everybody is on mute, just because sometimes there's background noise and you guys don't even realize it, and that's totally fine. But I'm just trying to make sure that the recording, you can hear what you need to hear. So in source 2, describe what is happening in Kansas. Be sure to use information from the entire source. So in Kansas, is it peaceful? You can unmute yourself, by the way. Just make sure you remute yourself when you unmute yourself, okay? So does it seem peaceful right now in Kansas?
Not really.
Yeah, no.
It seems a little insane.
It does, right? You have
Seems
people,
sketchy.
very sketchy, okay? So describe what's happening in Kansas here. There are conflicts between free state people and pro-slavery people. And this kind of goes both ways though, guys. Like right now in this letter that John Brown is writing to his family, this is kind of like the start of, I think, where John Brown he's like, there's just no justice. And because when he starts murdering people, because he does actually murder a few people, when he starts murdering people, he's never brought to justice either. So on both sides, there's so much injustice happening because of the fact that like there's just so much tension between these two groups, okay? So I'm going to kind of just summarize kind of what his letter's about really quick in here. So there are conflicts between free state people and pro-slavery people. A free state man was murdered by a pro-slavery man, and there was no true court case. A group of pro-slavery people attacked 3 to 4 free state men. Okay, so that's just a really quick summary of his letter. That doesn't get into like all of the specific details, but that really does touch base on everything from the letter. So yeah, because if the judge is already decided the case before it ever happens, then there really is no true court case there. So it's just really important to like kind of think about these things as you move forward. So I know I said that we would only do station 1, but I kind of want to look at something really quick with you guys, just because I want you guys to understand kind of some of the things that happen in station 2. I'm just going to read through these really quickly, and so that way you guys, we can come up with some answers together for station 2, okay? So concerning John Brown in Kansas, 1856 to 1858, when pro-slavery forces sacked the Free State town of Lawrence, that means like pretty much destroyed it, John Brown vowed revenge. The success of the pro-slavery guerrillas inspired Brown with four of his sons and 2 other accomplices to murder 5 reputedly pro-slavery settlers who lived along the Potawatomi Creek, justifying his action as obedience to the will of a just God. Brown soon became a hero in the eyes of Northern extremists and was quick to capitalize on his growing reputation. By early 1858, he had succeeded in enlisting a small army of insurrectionists, including 3 of his sons, whose mission was to foment rebellion among the slaves. So, the town he was living in was destroyed by pro-slavery forces. So he actually learns when it says pro-slavery guerrillas, they mean like guerrilla fighters. That's a form of fighting that's much more like ambush tactics. And so he learns from the pro-slavery guerrilla fighters, and he incorporates that into fighting back. He does murder, I think it says 5 people, to murder 5 reputedly pro-slavery settlers. So what we have here, guys, is these are 2 testimonies from the wives of some of the men who were murdered. So this is just like from their perspective, okay? So I'm just going to read really quickly through these, and then we'll talk about them and kind of wrap this up. We were all in bed when we heard some persons come into the yard and rap at the door and call for Mr. Doyle, my husband. Several men came into the house and said that they were from the army. My husband was a pro-slavery man. They told my husband that he and the boys must surrender. They were then prisoners. I asked them in tears to spare him. In short time afterwards, I heard the report of pistols, so gunshots. I heard 2 reports, then moaning. Then I heard a wild whoop. My husband and 2 boys, my sons, did not come back anymore. I went out the next morning and found them lying dead in the road about 200 yards from the house. So this woman, her and her family were woken up in the middle of the night. John Brown and his group, including his own sons, went into the house, took the husband and the 2 boys, took them outside and shot them. That's how this worked. The testimony of Mrs. Doyle and Mrs. Wilkinson is pretty much the same. So here's the testimony from Mrs. Wilkinson. We were disturbed by the barking dog. I was sick with the measles and woke up Mr. Wilkinson and asked him if he had heard the noise. Are you a Northern armist? He answered, I am. I understood the answer to mean that my husband was opposed to the Northern or Free Soil party. My husband was a pro-slavery man and was a member of the territorial legislature held at the Shawnee Mission. You are my prisoner. Do you surrender? He said, gentlemen, I do. They said, open the door. They searched for arms, then took my husband away. The next morning, Mr. Wilkinson was found about 150 yards from the house in some dead brush. My husband was a quiet man and was not engaged in arresting or disturbing anyone, okay? So, again, this man was taken out of his house in the middle of the night and also shot, okay? So, how does John Brown respond to the attacks in the anti-slavery city of Lawrence? Well, we've kind of already talked about this. He murders 5 pro-slavery men, if I can spell. So can somebody unmute themselves and just give me a quick summary of what Mrs. Doyle said? What was her testimony, essentially? And again, I'll put it over here so that way you guys can see it.
Is anybody else unmuted?
I think you're the only one so far, Celeste. So if you want to go ahead and just summarize what Mrs. Doyle.
Mrs. Doyle, one with that they knocked on the door and took her husband. All right, so forgot his name, something Brown, John Brown, yeah, and his 2 sons, I think, right?
in this case, it's actually the two sons from the pro-slavery man. So it's her
Okay.
husband. It's her husband and her two sons.
All right. So John Brown knocks on this woman's door, asking if her husband and his two sons surrendered, and they said yes, right? I think, yeah, they said yes.
Well, actually, that's Mrs. Wilkinson.
Okay.
According to this one, at least for Mrs. Doyle, there's no asking kind of thing. Oh, he just says, they told my husband that he and the boys must surrender, that they were
Okay.
prisoners.
So John Brown comes to this person's door, knocks it down, has a big entrance, takes the two sons and the person's husband, like 200 something meters away from the house, shoots them, leaves them in the road or something. And
Yep.
that's my play.
Thank you. So yeah, so that's perfect. So Brown and his men knock, it's fairly late at night, knock late at night and take the husband and two sons. Mrs. Doyle actually cries, asking for them to be spared. Meters, yards. Okay. So, and then Mrs. Wilkinson, it's very similar testimony, but it's just her husband. And there's a lot more asking going on. Part of me wonders if John Brown was double checking to make sure that this was a pro-slavery household. Because if you remember, Mrs. Wilkinson at the end of her thing says that like her husband wasn't really engaged in a lot of activities that would warrant being murdered for necessarily, but he did hold pro-slavery views. So does Miss Wilkinson tell a similar story? Yes, but her husband was asked more questions than Mrs. Doyle's. Okay, so very similar stories. So after looking at sources 1 and 2, what is your initial thought about who John Brown is? What is your initial impression of who John Brown is? You can unmute yourself and share.
A very mixed personality person.
Yes, okay, so very mixed personality. What is the mix there, Annalise?
What?
Like, what do you mean by mixed? Like, what is he mixed with? What do you think?
Like at first, like, it's like very like good people and everything, and then like he just killed people.
Yeah. So he kind of like he starts out kind of seeming like a fairly calm dude, and then eventually resorts to killing. So very mixed personality. Starts off relatively calm and then eventually begins killing people. I did see a chat. Let me see really quick if it'll pull up. Okay, there we go. A little bit on the bipolar-ish side for sure. I think it's easy to kind of see though where he like starts off and then how he eventually becomes very radical, right? Because he starts off like fairly calm, but then he's just seeing like all of this crazy like conflict happen in front of him. Celeste, what do you got?
Somebody said bipolar, and that was going to be my answer. I was waiting for that. Who said that? Tell me who it is.
Erilyn said that too. Like I think I can't remember. I want to say it was him. like the psychologists have done studies on his life and all of his writings and things like that. And I think that they have actually come down on the fact that he might have had some sort of bipolar disorder,
Oh yeah.
which is actually what caused the potential shift. Because people, I mean, we're products of our mental health and stuff as well. So it does make sense that he could be predisposed to bipolar disorder and then have all of these things happen to him that kind of trigger that within him. So very possible. But yeah, it's just, I think I can see where he becomes radicalized. I don't necessarily support the radicalization because I'm against killing. I am very much I practice nonviolence. That's more of my life. But over the course of history, there have been people who are very much more, he was radical. Yeah, he was definitely radicalized. But there's definitely more people, like, for example, Martin Luther King Jr. was nonviolent, and then Malcolm X really promoted change through more violent means, through more aggressive means. So in this case, John Brown really took the aggressive, violent route. And I've always been more of a pro, like doing nonviolence as much as possible, if that makes any sense. So far, your initial impression is just like very, very mixed. Just because we can see where somebody might have become radical doesn't necessarily mean that we accept that behavior, okay? I want to make that a clear distinction. So you have a few more after this to do. I think there's a total of seven stations and quite a few sources. So just do as many as you can, guys. Don't feel like you have to finish this whole entire assignment. I just want to see what you guys are thinking, because John Brown's just such a fascinating person to me, and his history is just really interesting. So I definitely encourage you guys to take a look at that a little bit more as you move forward, okay? So do I have any questions?
Me.
Who's me?
Celeste, me.
Of course. What's your question?
I was just gonna ask, you said we don't have to do all of this by June 3rd? Like,
No.
No? Okay.
Just do as much as, like, once you start to lose interest, just stop, okay? Because there's a lot of sources there, and if it's still interesting to you, like, maybe take a break and go back to it later, like, however you feel with this, because it's interesting. This dude's an interesting dude. So, but you don't have to do the whole entire thing. You do not have to do the 5-step. If you decide to do the final 5-step, that's fine. That way you're like kind of it's almost a way to show me what your thinking is. So like at the end, you need to come up with a decision as to how you feel about John Brown. Again, it can be kind of a mix. Like, I don't think that he was an innocent person by any means, but I do see him as a hero for the anti-slavery movement. But I definitely think that he was very problematic, and he had a lot of flaws, because for me, once we start allowing for some murder, where do we draw the line? Yeah, you can argue that he murdered only people who were pro-slavery, but killing your enemy is not the way to actually fix and move forward as a society. The only way that we're going to fix and move forward as a society is if we pull together and like actually listen to each other and try to not necessarily compromise, because there's just some cases where we're not going to agree, but definitely have to figure that out, because we can't just kill people. Like, that's not nice. That's not okay. So,
We can't.
what was that?
Oh, I was just saying we can't. Yeah, it's wrong.
So, yeah. So, Erilyn, does that make a little bit more sense on kind of what I was intending there?
No. I'm just kidding, yes.
Well, I was like, you're not Erilyn. Yeah, so this morning I was trying to go through and if I wanted to take that part of the assignment, so let me just show you really quick. Let's go back to this. So what I tried to do this morning was actually remove the John Brown Final Five step from here. But in order for me to do that, I actually had to delete the whole entire assignment and then redo it. And I'll just admit, I was a little lazy and didn't feel like having to do that for every single period. So you don't have to do that part. Skip it. Ignore it. Okay. So a couple things that are coming up on Monday. I will have all of the Civil War unit up and ready for you guys. I will probably do maybe not the unit PowerPoint, but I think what I would like to do is I would really like to do the battle mapping. So what's going to happen is you guys will get on Google Slides a map of the then United States, and we're going to like kind of map out where all the major battles, not every single battle because there's so many, but we're going to hit the major battles and major things that happened during the Civil War. And I really want to do that with you guys. There are some photos in there because Civil War is one of the first times where we actually have photographs from the battlefields. I will just warn you ahead of time. Yeah, you can just turn in, Erilyn, just the stuff we worked on. Yeah, that's fine. You don't have to go any further. You could stop there if you choose. Okay?
So this doesn't count as a grade? Or
Sorry, what was that?
The emails doesn't count as a grade?
Can you repeat that?
Do the emails count as a grade?
The emails.
Like the stuff that you do on Google Classroom?
So the thing is like I've been saying since we started this, none of this counts towards a grade at all. Everything that's history related is completely just supplement. Okay, so kind of getting back to what I was saying a second ago. So in this PowerPoint that we're going to be going over on Monday, I will just warn you ahead of time, there are photographs of dead bodies laying in battlefields. Also, there is a Andersonville Prison is a POW, a prisoner of war camp that was set up. The images from there, they look very much like images if you've seen them from the Holocaust. So bodies that are very, like very thin, like we're going to be looking at dead people essentially. And so I just want to kind of warn you guys ahead of time because sometimes seeing those images and you're not warned can have a negative effect. And so I just want to like let you guys know. I'll try to warn you guys before we get to those images, just so that way if you don't want to look at the screen, you don't have to, okay? But yeah, so just so you know, that's what's coming up. So with that, I think that's all I had for you guys today. Keep on sending me math questions. I will be making math videos as I get more questions. I do have one question that I haven't made a math video for yet that I got last night. So I'm going to try to make one today. We'll see how that goes. If not, it'll probably be posted by Monday. So yeah, I think that's it. So you guys have a great rest of your day and a very restful weekend. I've heard that some things are starting to open up, not like malls or anything, but I know that trails are opening up this weekend in LA County. I think beaches are starting to open up on Monday. So some things are starting to open back up. Just make sure that you're being as safe as possible, okay? Stay safe and stay healthy until I can see you guys again, okay? I'm going to head out today, so there won't be hangout session afterwards. I apologize. I hope that you guys have a great rest of your day, okay?
Mrs. Hamill. I mean, Miss Robinson. Sorry.
Even when we're not in school, I still get called Miss Hamill. What's that?
When are you gonna post this Zoom meeting? Like,
hopefully right after. I do need to do, it depends on how quickly YouTube will let me.
Okay.
Why?
Oh, because I just didn't get all of the stuff, so I don't know if I was going to get on Google Classroom.
It should be on Google Classroom by tonight at the latest, okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Miss
Good
Robinson,
question.
love you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.